Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen across the world, joining the Deutsche Welle Global Media Forum partner session, which we will discuss the smart cities with a distinguished list of pioneering leaders from across the world. My name is Yunus Arikan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. We are a network of cities, towns, regions in more than 130 countries with more than 2,500 network members. So our mission is for driving local action for sustainability through low emission, nature-based, resilient, circular, and equitable people-centered development. We are delighted to support this partner session with City of Bonn, where we are based, World Secretariat is based, and we'd like to thank Deutsche Welle to open the door to the urbanists, because we know in these 2 days you are mainly interacting with journalists, social media experts, but in this 25 minutes or so, we will introduce you the leaders in the cities across the world who would like to discuss with you how they manage and drive from disruption to community action. So we will have Mayor of Bonn as our first speaker. We are delighted to have the city of Bonn, who is partner of this and host of Deutsche Welle, but also leading in Global Executive Committee of ICLEI. Mayor Dörner will focus on climate emergency and how she is using the community power with the commitments of the city. We will also continue later on with Commissioner Bridget Scher from US, Texas, Austin, Texas. And she will also share as a regional government the challenges, but of course, especially with the racial inequality, especially gender engagement in the community sustainable action. But we're also very happy to have Bridget Scher because she has a background on journalism, and that will give her the opportunity to speak from the both sides of the communication world and the political leadership. And in the next couple of minutes, we will also expect to join with Mayor Araujo from Quelimane, Mozambique. It's another leadership in the city where it has been hit with disasters. But in these difficult conditions, they're also especially delivering services to their citizens with innovative approaches to food, resilience. So if this portfolio gives you that different types of cities, different conditions, but commitment to sustainability, commitment to citizen power is making what helps innovation to address disruption into collective sustainable movement. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor and invite Mayor Katja Dörner from Bonn. And we are delighted to hear your experience in Bonn, Mayor Dörner. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yunus. I'm also very happy that Bonn and ICLEI have partnered up to this panel, and thanks a lot to my colleagues on the ICLEI Global Executive Committee, Councillor Bridget Scher and Mayor Manuel de Arroyo, for joining me in this dialogue, and of course a very warm welcome to all participants of the Global Media Forum in 2021. Firstly, what is a smart city? For me, only a sustainable city is a smart city. And by smart, I mean technology as well as the shaping of communication, of participation, of cooperation. Because in the end, cities are above all home to people, and every one of them needs a livable future. Together with 2,500 other cities, towns and regions within the ICLEI network, we have long identified the essentials and the preconditions of that future and decided on pathways of how to get there. So, in a nutshell, we must achieve the global goals, the SDGs, tackle multiple emergencies while leaving no one behind. COVID has placed the health emergency high on our agenda, but it has changed none of the existing items. As ICLEI co-chair for climate action, I will focus on climate emergency today.
Do we have connection problem? Shall we give just some seconds to Mayor Döner, or Commissioner Shea is also on the line? I guess she's okay to intervene if needed. Can we give the floor to Commissioner Shea? Can we hear? I cannot hear you. Is the microphone green in your system?
It is, yes.
Yeah, now we can hear you very well.
You can hear me now? Okay, good.
Exactly. So let's change the order. Disruption needs also innovation in this kind of virtual life. We look forward to have Mayor Döner back. But in the meantime, maybe Commissioner Shea, you could give us the perspectives in the US. We have been for a long time witnessing, especially on climate action, there had been challenges with the federal government and local government. You are trying to elevate the voice of pioneering cities and regions, but you also have this background that in your professional life you were able to feel what it means to communicate with citizens and to bring them on board, because that we are feeling biggest challenge. You have city managers, you have experts making their plans, but as long as you don't bring the communities taking up, and as long as you don't get their buy-in, it's not easy to implement all these brilliant goals and principles and plans. So how can you address how you especially bring women power, community power, social inequity to dealing with disruptions and also emergencies?
Thank you so much, Eunice. I'm really delighted to be here and thrilled to be part of Deutsche Welle's Global Media Forum. And I hope we will get to hear from Mayor Döner of Bonn. I read her comments, and I really hope that we're able to make them available through this broadcast. On the subject of gender and social equity issues, I was also a member of the largest successful class action gender discrimination lawsuit against the US government and the Voice of America in the early 80s and 90s. So I have a lot of experience in that arena. And my comments are also, like Mayor Döner's, in the context of climate change and how a smart city should try to maximize and empower, in particular, women and communities of color. We know that devastation from climate change hits hardest in poor communities. And in the US, these are often communities of color. So gender and social equity must be at the very front of policies to address climate change. However, it generally doesn't happen that way, speaking from my experience in the US, and I think it's similar in many other places around the world. But I am encouraged by new initiatives in our community. A group in Austin, Texas, led by women and people of color, is called the Community Resilience Trust, or CRT. And their goal is to make Austin the most resilient and equitable city in our country. They formed shortly before the pandemic, and they had a powerful impact in addressing gender and social equity issues in Austin. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, our public health care district shut down clinics in minority communities because they had staffing shortages, and they said they needed to transfer staff to central locations. One result was very high infection rates in communities of color and low testing and low vaccination rates. The CRT documented this and lobbied elected officials and ultimately got the clinics reopened. And that really began to turn around the health picture in those communities. They also got funding for mobile testing and vaccination services that are reaching out to women and communities of color. Similarly, this last February, CRT was able to help many people during Winter Storm Uri. That climate-driven extreme winter storm caused power blackouts and froze water pipes across much of the state of Texas. Again, poor people, communities of color, many single mothers were hit hardest, and people were literally freezing in their homes because of extreme ice. They couldn't get to warming centers, they couldn't get food, and many were without water because their pipes had frozen. CRT and other loose-knit groups rescued many people, and our emergency, because they had to, our emergency response systems were overwhelmed. So I think this is a really important lesson of how we need to rethink being prepared for climate catastrophes. We can't depend on the police, fire, or ambulance to rescue us. There aren't enough of them. We have to depend on each other, and we have to include these organic networks that spring up, many headed by women and many in communities of color. We have to include them in how we respond to climate and prepare for climate disasters.
I think that was excellent. By the way, we are just informed Mayor Dörner's back into the dialogue. So the moment, yes, I think she's coming here. But what you pointed out, this, I mean, the politics has been really going through interesting moments for so many countries and for so many years. It's just seen as us and them. So some people are elected and they never listen to their citizens or communities after the election. They forget and they put a distance. But your case, that citizens are partners of local action, is something very unique. And that is very much the heart of the difference of a national politics or a global politics, which is very unique for local politics, I guess. I think that is probably the key. Any challenge, the more you can bring your citizens on board, can be overcome by the leaders who are responsible for that. I think that may be the key interesting point you can I derive from your comment. Is Mayor Dörner in? Can we hear her?
Hi there.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, great.
I'm very sorry. I don't know when the VLAN broke down.
It's okay.
I'm sorry for that.
Mayor Dörner, we used the time to listen from Commissioner Shea about how the women and the communities of color have turned out to be partners of the administration in the difficult times of both pandemic, but also power shortages. And Commissioner Shea was also trying to also give this examples from your city, which were similar in terms of bringing citizens and active partners of the administrations. Maybe you can continue, especially in the climate emergency, how you are bringing the Bonners as being leaders of driving the change in the system, in the city.
Yes, I don't know how long the connection worked, so I don't know whether I already talked about the Bonn for Future process, which is a very important process in our city because it involves the city society in a very wide range, and so everyone is asked to bring ideas into this very process. And I think what is also very important that it is closely related to my city administration. So it is a bottom-up process involving the city society in a very broad meaning, but it's also very closely linked to the city administration. And I'm very happy that we started this process. And I think there will be a lot of very interesting ideas that we then are able to transform into action into the city administration.
This example is one of the uniques. I mean, within ICLEI, we have hundreds of cities together with UN Climate joining this race to zero, but we are observing the uniqueness that Bonn is applying is that you are actually inviting, because they were the ones who asked the council to declare climate emergency, and the council is now opening the doors. Okay, if you wanted us to do this, let's do it together. And we were just saying that it is not an administration plan, but it is the community activities that is coming into the game, that is also empowering the officials, the engineers, the directors, that they can be much more ambitious and much more, let's say, progressive in terms of offering new ideas. Maybe you can talk about the mobility, Mayor Dörner, that is speaking to your heart in terms of one of the biggest sources of emissions, but also it needs transformational change. We're not just talking about technology, but the way you live in the city is what makes transport emissions a bit much different than others. So maybe you can give this example, and then we can go back to Commissioner Shea again in the case of the US.
Yes, as you already said, Yunus, the question of changing our mobility patterns is crucial to fight climate change on the local level. So new ways of mobility are on the core of politics in Bonn. And what we are doing is, for example, to bring more mobility hubs into the city. So a mobility hub is a very simple idea, but it makes a huge change if it is possible to combine walking, cycling, rental scooters or bicycles and all means of public transport usable, for example, with one app. So this is also a point where we can bring mobility and yes, smart city in means of technology together in inventing things via apps. So if you still drive a car and you can make it immobile, for example, then you can check an app for the closest parking spot and pay in that same app. So all this is what we are doing at the moment, bringing an exchange concerning mobility patterns and smart technologies together. For example, recently we have installed the first contact-free traffic light for bicycles, for example. So cyclists no longer need to get off their bike to push a button for green light. So it's a very simple thing, I think, but it also has a huge impact. So sustainability thrives through many smart decisions, and that is what we should proceed. I'm quite sure about that.
And that brings me maybe back to Commissioner Scher. The title is Innovative Cooperation. And living in Bonn, in a country, in a city where multi-level collaboration is like the DNA of this community here, whereas in the US, for time to time, you had ups and downs. You had phases where you had progressive federal governments, but in many of the cases you had to deal against a federal administration, and despite this you had tried to deliver results. So knowing that now we are seeing yesterday from G7, US is back into the multilateral process, how do you feel? How can we speed up this collective efforts and building confidence in the citizens, saying that yes, now we are on the right track and therefore they have to come on board? Maybe you can talk about this a bit more from your experiences there.
Absolutely. And then I do want to say a little bit about transportation emissions. I love what they're doing in Bonn, and we're doing some kind of interesting things here too. But yes, I am so grateful that we have a new administration that understands the importance of cooperating at a global level and that values government. And so this administration has made it very clear that local governments are a crucial part of reaching the Paris Climate Agreement requirements on greenhouse gas reduction. And we are very actively, through ICLEI and other environmental organizations, coordinating across the country with local governments on very specific actions to measurably reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the things we are doing in Travis County, and really it grew out of the pandemic, everyone had to take their laptops and go home and work from home at the beginning of the pandemic. And what we learned was it was pretty easy. It immediately reduced traffic congestion. It increased productivity. Our employees could get to work quicker and get their work done faster. It improved employee morale. Many employees love it. And we measurably and meaningfully reduced greenhouse gas emissions from our employee commute. It was the second largest source of our emissions at the county. We used the ICLEI ClearPath tool and identified the buildings, the energy used to heat and cool and light buildings, employee commute, and our fleet vehicles as the three largest sources of our greenhouse gas emissions. Well, by having people work from home, we saved $1,300,000 on our utility bills we weren't heating and cooling the buildings as much because there weren't many people there. We reduced our greenhouse gas emissions from employee commute by at least 30%. And tomorrow we're taking up an item to direct our staff to begin a plan to transition our fleet vehicles to electric vehicles. So to me, that's the silver lining from the pandemic, but it will have huge impacts on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and really beginning to reverse climate change.
This I think gives another opportunity back to Mayor Dörner, because at the moment today you are already talking with a network of German cities. I know you have to leave, but maybe you could also say that this is the best skill of the cities, learning from each other in a rapid way. And City of Bonn has traditionally been hosting such international gatherings. Maybe you can share, because you're also able to influence the UN, United Nations, because being hosting of UN Climate Secretariat. Maybe in the next couple of days ahead, how do you would like to continue with this exchanges in Bonn? I know there is some plans that's coming up in October. Maybe you can share with us before you leave, because I was informed that you may have to leave quickly. So feel free. We can hear from you, but it would be could be like your last roundup words, if you like.
So thank you very much. And I really want to underline that networking and bringing local communities together is very crucial. And I really would like to invite you to the Daring Cities virtual forum that will take place in October 2021. And I will be very pleased if we can talk together and exchange our views in autumn. And I'm looking forward to see you digitally then. And thank you very much for having me today. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Mayor Dörner, we thank you very much for your offer to be part of this partner session, because that was the first cities session in the Deutsche Welle Global Media Forum. So we're delighted to have this experience with you. We will continue, but on that line, that issue about cities being also shaping the global politics together with their collective purchasing power, together with their connectedness. And Mayor, Commissioner Shea, you mentioned about this. I remember there was a discussion between Pittsburgh and Wuhan in terms of solidarity. There was a huge discussion. Every day cities were connected through this internet to help each other from lessons learned. Maybe we could talk about how do you see this new normal. You mentioned about change of work spaces. How do you see you mentioned about potentials? Probably that brings us a bit more the need for introducing also new social mechanisms, because some of the cases that we could think about is that the people are feeling a bit both connected, but also losing the feeling of solidarity when you're alone in the 4 blocks in a house. Maybe in that sense, once again, the community connectedness, the feeling of workforce and the leaders, politicians as well, the partners. Is there any plan that you are trying to develop as addressing the challenges, also to making your city staff to feel much more confident that they can serve better?
Very good question. We actually adopted, I think, the most ambitious telecommuting goal in at least the region we're in Texas. Our county is attempting to achieve 75% telecommuting of eligible employees, meaning people who don't have to physically be at work to do their job, on an ongoing basis. We've hired a consultant, and they are literally creating the exoskeleton to support this so that it is sustainable and continues to be successful. And I think part of what we'll see is a hybrid, and the technology companies have been doing this for years. People work remotely, and then they'll come in and gather as a team on a periodic basis. And I think that's what we will move toward at the county, but it will still allow the majority of our employees to work from home and then come into the office maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks for team meeting. And for people who really don't want to work from home, they won't be required to, because for some people it is isolating and difficult. But I will say one of the things that I think we saw during the pandemic, and we're really trying to capture this. And I love Mayor Derner's vision of Bonn for Future and doing this all from the bottom up and really engaging the citizens. But I think because people were forced to go home at the beginning of the pandemic as just a means of preventing the contagious spread of the coronavirus, many people for the first time got to know their neighbors because they were stuck at home. So they went for walks in their neighborhood, they took their dogs out more frequently, and they met more of their neighbors. I saw lots of stories about this. And so I think that when we had the horrible ice storm that knocked out power and literally froze people in their homes, they knew their neighbors better. And so they were able to get help more easily from their neighbors because they'd gotten to know them. So I think that it's a really important part. And you're right, as we continue to do more and more work in the virtual world, I think we also have to strive to have these meaningful in-person ways of connecting with each other. It's just not the same to have a global conference where everyone is at home using their laptops or their computers, as opposed to being in person where you're able to really see people, get to know them, spend time with them personally. And I look forward to it when it's safe to do that.
We are just 3 minutes left according to the schedule of this session. Unfortunately, Mayor Araujo couldn't join us, but maybe I can connect, because the reason why we invited him, not just from African perspective, but also he has introduced one of the new emerging topics, which is the food. And that connects me to the point you made. The things that we thought was not our resource could be our asset. The urban gardening, urban roofs, that the more we are dependent on those transported foods, the more we can understand that it is, in fact, could be better if we do not rely on everything from the transported goods. There are cases. So I'm sure there's a huge also tendency in the progressive communities in the US about this urban gardening, urban forestry. Maybe you can wrap up, because that would be our last points, that the relation of humans with nature in cities is also something that we conquered, I guess, through the pandemic conditions.
Yes. There's been a very active urban farm movement in Austin for many years. Many of us own chickens, my family included. So we have fresh eggs every day, and we use our food scraps as food for the chickens, which they then turn into compost. So it's much easier than I think people realize. But I will say this, part of what's happening on our southern border with so many immigrants from Central America is because climate change has made their previously agricultural communities no longer viable. And I think we will see more and more of this kind of disruption, which can be terribly politically destabilizing. And that's another thing we have to be talking with our communities about, and we have to begin preparing people. But yes, I think we should all grow as much food locally as we can, because, I mean, even just with the Suez Canal being blocked, we saw how much that disrupted global transportation of goods and materials. Yeah.
Actually, that I think could be the conclusion of our. I enjoyed a lot this discussion about different opportunities, different let's say resources that we haven't seen before, is giving us the hope. I think the best renewable source is human spirit and human solidarity. I think that could be the message we could share across the world, that as long as we can understand that we can help each other is the way to overcome the disruptive challenges is something that we could be confident that we will always get to a better state of art with this solidarity and sharing and collaborating, I guess, from the cities, communities, but also across the world, across continents. So, Commissioner Shea, I thank you very much for your time, for your contribution, your leadership in ICLEI in the US and across the world. We thank Mayor Derner. Unfortunately, for connections, we couldn't connect with Mayor Araujo from Quelimane, but we will like to recall and value his leadership in African context, also bringing nature, food into the cities and sustainability, which is turning challenges into opportunities as well. I would like to turn to the organizers. Is that something that I should now wrap up, or because I see that we are getting to the half an hour? Or if you want, we can continue. Of course, we would be happy. If not, we could thank Deutsche Welle for giving us this opportunity to the urbanists, to local leaders, share how they can use innovation as a solution to disruptive times.